One thing both sides in the independence debate agree on is that next year's referendum will be the biggest political decision Scotland has faced in more than 300 years.
To be serious for a second about, I'm going to phrase this as carefully as I can. I think in a strategic sense, to argue that you need a Trident capability Vanguard submarine fleet to defend yourself against North Korea is in a strategic sense to take leave of your senses. The Trident submarine fleet was designed to penetrate the defences around Moscow or Beijing. It was designed have the capability of overcoming the most sophisticated defence framework. It was never designed as a deterrent against a rogue state which doesn't have the capability to reach the UK by several thousand miles at the present moment. And if anyone argues that we need nuclear weapons of that scale and capability to defend against North Korea, then that would be a recipe for virtually every country in the world possessing nuclear weapons. It would be the most extraordinary thing, as opposed to relying on a collective defence structure, which most rational and sensible people would do. I would argue that you should rely on that defence structure. I think my own view would be if Germany can get by without an independent nuclear deterrent, then I think the United Kingdom should manage that as well, in my estimation. But if you weren't persuaded of that argument and you wanted to have a deterrent against North Korea, you certainly wouldn't have the Trident ballistic submarine system. That's just an extraordinary argument. So I think basically the Prime Minister was looking for a rationale for spending £100,000 million sterling over the next 50 years in renewing the Trident submarine fleet and basing it fast lane. And I think to use North Korea as a reason for that is pretty superficial and flawed. In terms of what would happen, it would be unprecedented for any country. I think, as I said in my speech, it would be absurd to argue in independent Scotland, a country of 5.25 million people, should be a nuclear power. Nobody seriously would want that to happen. It would be unprecedented for a country to station all of its nuclear capability in another country. I don't think that, if memory serves me, has ever happened in world history, and I think it's just a pretty strange proposition. So if the United Kingdom government wants to continue, against my advice, and I'm sure against the feelings of many other people, with an independent nuclear deterrent, then it will be their responsibility to find somewhere to house it. Could it be done technically? Almost certainly yes. The Trident fleet is recommissioned, and Devonport, which has berths for Trident submarines. A more pressing issue, I'd think, would be the supply of armament. It could be done by France, it could be done by the United States. My advice, it's worth, such as it's worth, to the United Kingdom would be not to do it, to take this opportunity to become a non-nuclear power. But that I accept is a matter for the United Kingdom government to decide on. And it's a matter for the Westminster Parliament to decide in the future. But it's not reasonable to say that another country should take responsibility for hosting the largest concentration of weapons of mass destruction in Western Europe. And I think it's entirely unreasonable to suggest that North Korea is a reason for re-equipping a Trident ballistic submarine fleet.
What happens to the submarines at Faslane? Do you order them to sail south? And do you know where they would sail to?
Well, they should be safely removed. The time period for the removal, once Scotland becomes independent, and after, of course, people have elected their first government in independent Scotland, but if it were to be an SNP government, then we would ask the submarines to be removed from Scotland as soon as was safely possible, and the emphasis, obviously, on the safety, because nobody would want to compromise that in any way. But, of course, a country has the right to say, we don't want to possess nuclear weapons, either our own or anyone else's.
When you talk to defence ministers in London, they say, oh, well, we might have some kind of lease-back arrangement, a bit like the base in Cyprus. That is for the birds, as far as you're concerned, isn't it?
Yes, it is for the birds. I think the Ministry of Defence actually briefed quite recently, I know they did, that they were going to annex Faslane. But that particular ridiculous scare story just lasted overnight before Downing Street did dismiss it. So, I think the reality is that if Scotland becomes an independent country, if they choose the SNP to be the government, then we'd want to see Scotland as a non-nuclear country, part of the NATO alliance certainly, part of the defence structures, cooperating on defence, but cooperating from the basis
how soon
of being
can this be achieved?
a non-nuclear country.
How quickly could that happen,
Well,
do you think?
We've put forward a policy, Andrew, that as soon as could be safely organised. Now, there are estimates which says that could be done in a relatively short period of time. But of course, the reason we put forward the policy in the way we did was to allow that point of negotiation when the time comes. And of course, at a time when President Obama made clear in his State of the Union address, the world's focus must be to seek further reductions in our nuclear arsenals. For an independent Scotland, a country of 5.25 million people, to host nuclear weapons would be absurd. No one seriously believes that an independent Scotland should be a nuclear power.